Hello, everyone. Thank you for stopping in to Beyond the Mortgage again. And as the name says, we are going beyond the mortgage today. I've got my good friend Mike Schwartz in here. I've known Mike since about 2018. He is a veteran of our Marines, and he's with his service dog Chevrolet. We're going to just kind of talk about Mike's process through his military service, when he kind of decided he wanted to or needed to get the service dog for some challenges he was facing. And we're just having a little conversation about that.
Yeah, thanks for having us on the show, brother.
Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's so good to see you.
You too, man. So let's start out, I guess, what inspired you to join the military?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because sometimes I have choices, right? So in high school, I grew up in a small town in Missouri. So there were like two main roads, and where I lived, and most of the people in high school went on to work fast food, then you become a manager, you move into your trailer, that kind of thing. And as I was going through high school, college really wasn't like a discussion for me. We weren't, in a situation where that was going to be viable, right?
Okay.
It was never really discussed with me, and I realized that if I wanted to get out of this small town mentality, and I remember sitting in high school my junior year, and we were having this pep rally, and all the military services were there, and there was a statistic that really hit me hard, and it said 1 out of every 10 high school students join the military, right? And they talked about the success rate of those that joined the military and what the benefits were. And they said, so turn around, look at your closest friends, and figure out which one of you is going to be in the military, right? And I, looking at my group of friends, I went, I guess that's me. I didn't really have a lot of options, at least in my perception in life at that time. And I was like really into martial arts. Like I had my black belt and I was teaching karate at the time. And at that point in my life, my goal was really to try and get on the Olympic karate team.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so realizing that college wasn't going to be an option, I didn't want to stay in this small town. I needed to figure something out, and so I figured if I'm going to do any military at all, I want to take my martial arts skills, and I wanted to be a Marine, right? Like it wasn't for everybody, but I felt just like, being very disciplined, it was like if I'm going to do the military, I'm only going to do one branch, and that's the Marine Corps. And so I went and talked to a recruiter my junior year, got my plan, how I'm going to do it, took the ASVAB, scored pretty well on the ASVAB, the entrance exam, and then I did a delayed entry program. So right after I graduated my senior year, I went right into the Marine Corps, so 1988.
So you knew your whole senior year,
Yeah.
you already knew this is...
Yeah, I was
what I'm
running a
doing.
lot and lifting weights as much as I could.
Sure.
And my biggest concern was the run, because even though I ran cross country in high school, I never really ran on the team to win. It was just more of like I really enjoyed running cross country. I never had any like first place medals or anything, but I just enjoyed it, and
Kind of like Forrest Gump.
yeah, just keep running, man, because you're out in the woods and you're just running.
Right. You lose. It's kind of just probably a little peaceful. I mean, as peaceful as running can be.
It was good, and the childhood was probably less than stellar, like how I grew up and where I grew up, very typical. I found out years later of most Marines. So I use running and martial arts as kind of a way to try and tame that situation. And so I thought the Marine Corps, having no idea, I literally left like the week of Christmas the following year, and was like, had no clue what I was getting into. I started running, trying to get faster and faster, because typically in the Marine Corps you want to run a 6-minute mile, and you have to run 3 6-minute miles to do well on the PTF, the physical fitness exam.
Sure.
And I was like, if I'm going to do it, you do it the best you can, right? And then pull-ups, I had never done pull-ups, right? So I was starting to do pull-ups, but it was good. And when at the end of my senior year, I think I had, I knew very well, or I knew that I was going in, but I didn't say anything to anybody. I just was like, I'm just leaving. I want to get out of this town and just disappear, And I know that I ended up going to the Marine Corps boot camp in San Diego. And I've trained both at Parris Island and in San Diego, which is in California. So you got your choice of the beaches and the sand fleas, or the bitter cold in the mountains. But being from the Midwest, I'll take the mountains anytime.
Right.
Yeah, I was in my natural element, and I really enjoyed it. Being out in the mountains, and boot camp was, I think it's more when I was in, Marine Corps was going through a bit of a transition. So it was very mental, right, which I wasn't at all prepared for. Like, there were a lot of kids whose parents were military and their whole family. I literally knew nothing about what boot camp was going to be about until I got to boot camp.
Okay.
Like, no idea. I didn't even want to know. I was just like, I got to get out of here, or I'm going to end up being the next McDonald's manager living in a trailer in a small town in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
So,
Okay. So you get out of basic training, and then do you immediately get deployed? Or?
No, actually, I went to training in San Diego for security forces. Counterterrorism was my specialty. And what I was hoping for was, because they had, was to get onto that karate team, right? And then join that karate team and then be stationed wherever so I could compete in the Olympics. Well, come to find out that very quickly after boot camp, that was never going to happen. It was a real shock. I was too young at the time to really understand why, but once I realized that was never going to happen, then I was like, okay, well, just send me out to the field up into the mountains. And I did a lot of training out in San Diego in the foothills of California, and went to security force training, and then and there's a lot of CQB, close quarter combat training, and I thought, this is awesome, man. Maybe go to an embassy or something like that, which was pretty prestigious duty. If it's somewhat boring, but I wanted to be in the thick of it, man. I didn't want to be sitting in a barrack somewhere I wanted to use my martial arts skills and everything I'd learned in boot camp. And Marines are a little bit of a different breed, but I wanted to make bad people go away, or do the right thing. And I ended up getting deployed to after boot camp. So you go through all the training. It was about 6 months of training, and then I'm thinking I'm going out to the hills in Cali, and I get told that the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower wants to select some Marines for the aircraft carrier. And I'm like, I don't want to be on a boat, man. I don't want to be around any of that. Just put me in the mountains, I'm good. And sure enough, man, because of the training we'd had and my background, they were like, you're going on the boat. And then I got immediately deployed to Quantico, to Norfolk, Virginia. And 6 months after boot camp, right, I'm on this giant aircraft carrier with the 99% Navy personnel. And and I get on the boat the day they're pulling out, and then I'm gone for like 2 years.
Wow.
I did 2 back-to-back deployments. So we'd be gone for like 6 months, come back, and they'd work on the boat, and then we're gone again. And on that second tour, that's when the Gulf War broke out. We were on a med cruise, and I remember I was on the island of Capri, actually, hanging out on the beach, trying not to drown. The water there is so beautiful, man, and you think you can dive to the bottom, and it's so clear,
it looks closer than it is.
It's so far down. And but then I remember getting the call back to the ship, and that's when they said the Gulf War, we're going to war. And then we raced out to secure the Suez Canal. It was pretty interesting, man. So
what's it like when obviously you're doing your training and you're ready and you've been through everything, but when you get that call or that notice like, hey, we're going.
Yeah.
What's that like? It's got to be a little bit of adrenaline, a little bit of nervousness.
It is. I can't. It's hard to explain because it's real, but you've been training so hard. It's just like, for me, it was just like anything else, like in martial arts or run. You've been training, and I always took the training very seriously. There were people who didn't take the training seriously, and when it hit the fan, and we were actually going through the canal, and there was they called general quarters, and you're donning everything. We're up on the flight deck. I'm manning a 50 caliber machine gun on the side of the Eisenhower, and you've got most of the Marines in their places. You've got, there's so much firepower on the side of it. For me, I was like, let's get in it. Let's do it. But you could tell those that really they were going through the steps, but they weren't really engaged. It was interesting because they panicked.
Sure.
And you were like, what's going on, right? Like I felt ready. I honestly, and it's going to sound, this is kind of like looking back on things where maybe things weren't as healthy as they should have been. But, at that point when that was, they said we're going, they're asking you to fill out your will, and you're signing all these documents, you're getting all these shots that you have no idea what they are. And they're talking about, warfare, and they're reminding you of, chemical warfare and all that stuff like that. And they're talking about, if we make land, your life expectancy duration is about 88 seconds, that type of stuff. And I was just like, it is what it is. This is what we came for. This is what we're going to do. And I was always kind of taken back. I'm like, man, it doesn't sound very long.
Right.
And I don't know what they were basing it off of. I was 18, 19 at the time. I had no idea, but I felt like let's rock and roll, man. If I'm going down, I'm going down with a someone's going with me.
Sure.
But there were people who were panicking. I saw it quite a bit, and it was kind of heart-wrenching to see that all this training, all this stuff we were doing, did you think it was a joke?
Right.
But you get Marines military personnel come from all walks of life, man. And I'll find out later in my life that there's a lot of commonalities, actually, what the recruiters look for in that type of personnel, like who makes a good Marine, who makes good Army, that type of stuff. I found out years later from recruiters that a good, fit, angry, and caffeinated teenager makes a good Marine. But I was prepared, to be honest with you. I really didn't expect to come back. I had it in my mind, and that was what we were trained as. Don't expect to come back. Fill out your will, send it home, say your goodbyes. And you're kind of in the heat of the moment. And I think that the challenge that you face is these people you've been training with for years. I went in on this buddy program in the late 80s, early 90s, where you go to boot camp with your friends, and you go to training with your friends, and then you get deployed with your friends, right? So you have that camaraderie.
Sure.
And when I was on the Eisenhower, you're broken down into 5-man teams, and you spend a lot of time training with these people, and they're closer than any family I had ever grown up with. So you start worrying about, your only thought at that time was, I'm with the only people I need to be with, and whatever happens, I got to make sure my brothers get home. So that was kind of the mindset at the time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I bet you said you spend so much time, and it's every day you're sleeping with this. You are family.
Yeah.
I mean, you're trusting these guys with your life. They're trusting you with theirs, and you have to know that you can count on them.
Yeah. I mean, like most military, and every branch has its good and bad, but when you're on a ship, everything is really close quarter. You're showering, you're using the restroom with the same people. Your family problems at home in the States are their problems, and you start to find out that a lot of you have the same background, a lot of the same issues, broken homes. Not all, but a lot of us did. Marines, Uncle Sam's misguided children. Because a lot of you come from broken homes, and this is the first time you're experiencing someone really caring about like what's going on, and not from a perspective of like I have to, but from I need you and you need me for us to get out of this. It was a real, at 18, 19 years old, it's a real eye-opener, especially if you don't grow up in an environment like a lot of these guys did, self-included, where you felt like nobody really cared. Like you were just like discarded, So it was pretty intense.
I bet.
Yeah, it definitely changes your perspective on life from that moment forward. So.
And that's what, obviously, so you go there, you're there for, you said 2 years, and then after that, like, how long were you on active duty?
Yeah, so I spent from 88 to 92 on active duty, and my 2 of those years were on the Eisenhower. The last 8 months I was in Norfolk at the medical facility because I got injured in my second tour in Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield, and that kind of ended my military career, which really sucked because I had no plans beyond. There were 2 things I hadn't. One, I didn't expect to make it home.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had just accepted that fact. But I'm taking somebody with me, man. Like some bad guy's going with me.
Right.
And then the other piece of that was when I did get back to the States, I got sent out on Med Station 5. I had a really bad traumatic back injury. Right. I crushed L3, L4, and L5 and S1 vertebrae. And at the time of my injury, I couldn't feel a lot in my legs. I had like really bad headaches. My vision was bad. It was bad. I probably should have had surgery. And I lost most of my hearing. And some of that's just from general military. Some of that's from the Gulf. But all I kept thinking about and all I kept asking and trying was I just wanted to get back to my team. I want to get back to my team. I want to get back to my team. And the harder I fought, the more they disconnected me from my team. And then in the 90s, things were a little bit different in the military. Nowadays, in some of the branches, you'll see people with an artificial leg and they're capable of doing their mission. But, the weak link, the hard part to accept is once you become the weak link, you endanger everybody else on the team, right? And you have there's a chance that you could get the whole group killed, if you suddenly can't perform your duty. And it was so hard to accept. Like,
I bet.
And I spent about 8 months at Norfolk General or Portsmouth General Hospital in Virginia Beach trying to recover, having no idea what I was going to do next, man. It was like I hadn't, my dreams of if I ever made it back, my thought process was I'll go do police department for 5 to 7 years, and during that time maybe try and get enough college to go to the FBI or CIA. Okay. And that was the original plan after my injury. That was just gone. Karate gone, Olympics gone. I mean I barely graduated high school, and I was like, I'm laying in this hospital for 8 months. There were times when, they'd ship me to different hospitals, and I didn't see people for 3 or 4 days, and I'm just laying in there, unable to move, at the time, and slowly getting better, going to therapy 2, 3, 4 times a day, physical therapy, and I finally just, they wanted to do surgery, and back then, what they did is they fused the discs together.
Sure.
And I refused because I went and interviewed, I got in a wheelchair and I had the nurse roll me around, and I went and interviewed people who had had the surgery, and all of them told me don't do it because it just gets worse. They don't do that much anymore. Right? Because they now know that every time they fuse the bones together, the next one above gets bad, and then the next one above, and so then it ends up being all the way up your spine. Yeah. And most of those guys are now like completely, they can't move at all, or they're way worse than they were before. And I refused to have it done. But there was a high cost for that, because then they told me that if you're not going to have the surgery, then we're kicking you out. And I was like, what am I supposed to do at this point? Right? Yeah, I'm like, and when you got out back in the 90s, it wasn't like they had a ceremony for you, even as enlisted. They didn't have, go, here's your discharge papers. You go and you sign a bunch of papers and they send you out. And I'm like, where am I supposed to go? I don't have $1 to my name. I was sitting down, and I'm not from Virginia. At that time I'm not from Virginia. I can't go back to my family in Missouri. I can't even get on a plane. I couldn't even walk. At that time when I was getting out, I was able to get on my feet a little bit, but it was really bad. It was like I was on so much morphine and so many other drugs just to make the pain bearable. Because at that point, I couldn't even sleep more than about an hour without having to get up and do all these stretches and all this stuff. And then when you get sleep deprived, then you spiral
Sure.
downward. And I spent about 10 years like that after the military.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really, I lost so much weight. It was horrible.
Well, yeah, I can imagine. I
Yeah.
didn't go through it myself, but I would imagine that you're so focused and so trained, and this is what I'm here to do, and then when that's done,
Yeah.
especially abruptly,
Yeah, like overnight.
right?
Yeah,
You're like, what do I use it? What do I do now?
yeah.
So how did you, I guess, handle that transition?
Man, it was bad. I didn't handle it well at all. There weren't very many resources back in the '90s like there are now. Like I see a lot of, and those that were available were like, if you weren't a Vietnam vet, they didn't really want to talk to you. Because you got to remember, the Gulf War was like the first real encounter since Vietnam.
Sure.
So while everybody was praising us, there was very little help, right? And the VA had already washed their hands. Department of Homeland Security already said, you're damaged good. We're giving you 10% disability when it should have probably been 100% at that time. But back then, I mean, it was near like if you weren't missing 3 limbs and your head, you weren't getting 100% disability.
Really?
I mean, it was pretty crazy. And so I think back then in '92, I was getting like $89 a month, which wouldn't even cover a taxi ride to and from a doctor's visit, which was like the nearest VA hospital for me was like 2-hour drive.
Holy
And
cow.
at that point I couldn't even drive. There was nothing. And I didn't handle it very well. I was previously married, and it just destroyed the marriage. Part of that was it just destroyed the marriage, and I ended up moving up to Northern Virginia thinking that there might be better opportunity there. And during my time up in Northern Virginia, I spent about almost 2 years homeless, living in my Honda Civic. I was trying, and the worst part is I had a job and I had a house, but I was going through this really bad divorce, and I mean, like worst case scenario, and I had to rent my townhouse out to pay for my legal fees, and I couldn't go to the shelters because I had a job. And let me tell you, Northern Virginia gets pretty cold in the middle of February.
Oh, yeah, as you see right now. Right?
Yeah, and it sucked, and with a back injury, and it was real, like one of the lowest points in my life, and it was bad, man. Because I was trying to work, but like I had to hold a second job to pay for health care so that I could work the first job. You know what I mean? Like I had that because of I was trying to see all these back specialists. The VA wouldn't cover it. My health care insurance didn't cover it at the time through the company I was working for. And so I had to work a second job to pay for health care so I could work my regular 8-hour job. And and then when you have that type of injury where just standing on your feet, just moving wrong could lay you up for 2 weeks. And that did happen from time to time. And then being homeless was just like, it really kind of just took me down this like really dark path, like a really bad, it's just a really bad feeling, like I can look on it now, I can look back on it now, and knowing what I know, having gone through it, right, adversity teaches us some of the best lessons. But I didn't have a family to go back to. I didn't really have any friends because I was working full-time or all-time. And after I left my team, several of the guys that I served with were either killed in the Gulf or came out and committed suicide. And so of that whole team, there was like one guy left.
Wow.
And
one guy being you? Or
no, other than myself.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and some of it, like I said, some of the guys got out, and I didn't know it at the time because I was so wrapped up in my own, like, what is wrong with me? What is going on? I thought, doing these things, these good things would bring good things to me. And in fact, it was quite the opposite, right? Like, I can look back and it would have been great to have a support system or something to just, go that way and you'll be okay. And it's hard because especially when you're sick, like if you're drained, your body is constantly fatigued, you're on all kinds of medication that just wreaks havoc with your mood, your sleep, I was taking medications to try and sleep so that my body could heal enough to work the next day, but then I'd have side effects from the sleeping pill, so I had to take another pill and it was just like at one point I think I was on like 18 different meds.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it was, and it's just, and you just feel like you don't know if you're awake or if you're asleep. There were times I'm driving home and I couldn't remember if I was going to work or coming home from work. It was that bad. It was. I mean, I laugh now, but it wasn't funny then.
Well, no, I mean, that's your existence, and it's just pain, meds, trying to sleep, trying to work, to support yourself, and then
the worst part about that is then, I was fighting for custody of my son at the time, and they basically deemed that no matter how much wrong my ex-wife could do, that they were going to give custody to her, and I wasn't, we had originally when I tried to make it amicable for both of us when we were divorcing, and at that time in my life I didn't even know that I was messed up, and probably contributed quite a bit to the divorce, not realize, because I didn't know what PTS was. I didn't believe in PTSD. I didn't believe in any of that. Like I was just like, oh, that's just, it's shell shock. It's just hearsay. It's just war's going to change anybody, whatever, And the stuff that keeps you alive in those situations, you learn to rely on. And what you don't realize is that when you come back, that's not really beneficial in the civilian world. I mean, it can be,
sure,
but you have to know how to control it. You have to know when to keep it in your back pocket, and you have to acclimate to the civilian population. Well, when I got out, there was none of that. There was no transition. It was just like the night I got injured. It's just like the next morning someone flips a switch, and now you're a civilian, and you have all this baggage. And you're like, what do I do? And you think it's normal.
Sure.
But it ended up being really the lowest point in my life, and there was a point where I was commuting 6 or 7 hours a day on top of working 10 to 12 hours a day. I mean, it was almost 24 hours a day going back and forth. And there were times like because of the 2 jobs, and then the visits to the VA or the doctors it just took its toll, man. And one day I'll never forget, and this was, so my one friend Jay, who I served with, we used to talk almost every day. And I don't know if you want to hear this or
sure
not. Yeah, I mean, I'll share it with you. We used to talk almost every day or every other day, and it was just weird because we had similar childhoods, similar situation. He's going through a divorce. He was dealing with being an alcoholic after the Gulf War because he stayed on, and he had like several tours.
Okay.
He ended up really having to deal. He ended up having to shoot a kid while he was over there, and it really wreaked havoc with him and his wife, and she ended up leaving him, and he was going through a divorce, and we just had so much in common. We talked to each other, trying to keep each other, have each other's back, and almost always, whenever I saw his number come up, or vice versa, right, you answer no matter what. During that time, I remember my mom, who was like 52 at the time. I got a phone call from my older brother, and my mom was killed in a car accident. So I'm just moved back into my townhouse, right? I'm just getting away from being homeless. I moved back into my townhouse. I have to evict the people that are there. They destroyed the interior of my townhouse. And because you gotta remember, I had to rent it out so I could pay for my legal fees and my medical bills. And so I moved back in. I haven't been there for long, and I get this phone call from my older brother that my mom's dead and someone's got to go to Florida to identify her body. So I go down to Florida, and she it was tough, man. She's a wreck, and she was 52. And I meet my older uncle there, who was a Vietnam veteran, and he's a wreck. And this guy's like 6'6", just a Neanderthal, and this guy's like a wreck. And he's like, she was beat up pretty bad. I'll just leave it at like that. She was in a really bad car accident. And, so he, luckily, I didn't have to go in and see her. He identified it was her, and he confirmed it was her. And he handed me the jewelry that she was wearing and stuff like that. I have 2 older brothers, which we divvied that jewelry and stuff up. But it was really hard. So long story, I ended up having to go back to Virginia. And after we had taken care of her estate and all that, my older brother, who lived closer than I did, was finishing stuff up. But while I was at my mom's estate helping my older brother pack all her stuff, get rid of everything, I get a phone call from Jay, who was like my last close friend at the time that I served with. And because, I had my 2 brothers there that were really close with my mom, we weren't really close. And I'm trying to deal with them and their wives, who were like, I don't know if you ever been at an estate and people are going through, oh, this is mine, that's mine. I could have cared less about anything, right? And I ended up having to send their wives home because I was about to blow my top. But my older brother and I are pretty close, and I was trying to help him out. But during that time, Jay called me, and I didn't answer. And I was like, I can't do it right now, man, because I know what he's going to want to talk about, what's got him down and stuff. And I didn't take the call. It was the first time in like years I didn't pick up the phone, right? And this was back on the flip phones, texting was a nightmare.
Right.
And so then he called again and again, and I finally just turned the phone off. Didn't think anything of it, and then I drove back from Minneapolis to Virginia, and I get back home, and there's a notice on my door with this little tag from the sheriff's department. And it says, can you give us a call? And I was like, what did my ex-wife do now? Or what am I in trouble for,
Sure.
So I called them, and they said, hey, we'd like to meet with you. And I'm like, am I in trouble? Well, I'm just like, it's like, can it get any worse?
Right.
So the sheriff shows up, and they ask me about Jay. And I'm thinking, oh, man, he got himself in trouble. He got drunk, and he got into a fight or something. And basically, at that point, they just asked me when was the last time I talked to him. They wanted to see my phone, asked if it was okay to see my phone records. I shared it with them, and that phone call was him calling to say goodbye. And when I got home, I found out that he had taken his life, and that he was calling to say goodbye because he left me a voicemail. And his wife was kind of like blaming different people. She was really going through a lot of grief. But if I had to live with, I still have to live with the fact that if I had just answered the phone and talked to him, I could have maybe talked him out of it, and it just hit a low. I was done. I was ready to check out at that point. I was like, I've lost everything. I did everything I was supposed to, and no guidance, no structure, no support. I was just like, I'm done. I'm ready to check out. And a few months go by, and things just are getting worse at work. It's just taking its toll, and the meds don't help. The lack of sleep doesn't help. And it just got to the point where I was like, I wasn't even mad anymore. I was ready to check out. My 30th birthday was coming up. My mom was gone. All my friends were gone. I'm barely paying the bills. I think after child support and taxes, I was making like $34,000 a year. I think I was left with like $2,000 for the year. And the courts were just reaming me, and I was like, I'm done, man. I'm checking out. And I'll never forget the day. So the only person that I had any contact with at that point was a neighbor that lived across the way from me. His name is F, and he was really concerned, but I just remember that morning, man. And I wasn't religious at the time. Like, I believed in God, but I wasn't Catholic or anything like that. And I don't know if I can say this or not, but I took my Beretta, man, and I took my round. I used to shoot pistol competition all the time, and it was a good way to relieve stress. And that thing was meticulous, it never misfired. And I remember I went down, and I had coffee. I love coffee, so I went down and had my coffee, and I loaded one round and pulled the trigger, man, and it didn't go off.
You're kidding me.
No, man, I was done.
So you were,
I was done.
you weren't messing around.
No, I had
It wasn't like, hey, I'm looking, it was.
I just didn't want to feel the pain anymore, both physical and mental. I was like, and I remember right before that I had this, God and I'd never really prayed before. I had a good 30-minute knockdown drag out with the big man upstairs. I mean, I'm Catholic now.
Mm-hmm.
I did everything I didn't know you were supposed to do. We had a long talk, man, and I was in tears, man. I was sobbed. I was on my knees, and I was like, if this, I was F-bombing him, which is, man, I still repent to this day. Yeah, man, it was bad. And I just said, if this is what the rest of my life is like, you can have this back. I'm done. And I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just at that point where, but I pulled the trigger and it went click. And I was like, and like I said, this thing's never misfired in all the years I'd had this Beretta. And I know, that gun was meticulous. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I can't even do that correctly. I was getting ready to pull the hammer back, and there's a knock on my door, and my front door, and it was my neighbor F. And he's like, peeking through I had a stained glass door, right? And he's peeking through and he's knocking, and he's like, I know you're in there, man. I saw the lights on. It's early. Come have coffee with me, And I was ignoring him, and I was getting ready to pull the trigger a second time. Figured, at that point, you're just gone. Like emotionally, you're gone. And he kept banging on the door, and he's like, come on, man, I made a fresh brew of coffee. And I'm sitting there thinking...
So he could sense something.
Yeah, he was concerned. And thank God, too, because I was like, okay. So I just put my pistol down on the table, and I'm like, you know what? I'll go have a cup of some fresh brewed coffee. I got nothing to lose. So, because my 30th birthday was the following day. It was like 2 days. It was like the 3rd. February 3rd, and my mom was gone. Like I said, all my friends were gone. Jay, I was still trying to figure out if I had just answered the phone. Phone, and I just couldn't cope with it, and which was weird. Like I thought I could cope with anything, but it just got between that and being tired all the time and physically exhausted. It was a nightmare, and I went over to go have coffee. Unbeknownst to him, what was going on, right? And he told me, he said, man, I really was worried about you, and I know life's been bad, but I got 2 tickets for a 2-week cruise for the 2 of us. It's a family cruise. We'll just go and hang out. And I was like, I got 17 cents in my bank account. I owe like $2,300 in back child support. They're not letting me see my kid. And I couldn't even get to the metro to get on a train to go somewhere to get to a cruise. And he's like, no, it's all inclusive. It's paid for. It's my gift for your birthday. We'll go together. And I was like, I can't pay you back. That's got to be, I'm thinking thousands of dollars. And he goes, oh, no, I got a good deal on it through he was a federal employee. And so I was just like, I got nothing to lose, right, man. And it was so against everything I believed in because I couldn't even pay for a beer. Like I couldn't, if I had to put out, I literally had 17 cents in my bank account, right? And I think that like the charges were like $1.99 a month for, I was just like, I had like 17 cents and I was like, there's no way I can, and I just gave in. I was like, I'm going to go on this trip and be a complete man whore. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to finish what I started. I'm going to go out with a bang. Hell yeah, man, And I think that it was really interesting because that was the 180-degree turning point in my life. Because on that cruise, that's where I met Gina, my wife.
Yeah.
And it was just so weird. It was like just one thing after another, after another, after another started falling in place. Because I got on that cruise, and it's not my personality to be a man whore, right? Even though I was a Marine, like I should have been, but I just couldn't do it. I got on the boat and I was like, that's just not my personality. I can't do it. And it wasn't 5 minutes after I got on the boat that I'm standing there with F and we're waiting to get online, and there's this absolutely the most beautiful woman I had ever seen that was talking to me in my life. And I was just like, I'm thinking to myself, okay, yesterday I was trying to end everything, and now I've got this dark-haired, green-eyed beauty talking to me with the most beautiful black silk hair halfway down her back and just flirting away, you know, and I literally was like ignoring her, like, you know, this is absolutely, you need to find somebody else because I won't be here in 2 weeks, right? You know, that was my thought process. But she wouldn't take no for an answer, man.
No, not Gina.
No, I mean, and I didn't, you know, I finally turned around and just started talking to her, and I couldn't believe, like, this, everything I ever wanted in a woman in my life. You know, of course we were both younger and we both looked better back then, but, you know, she and I were just like, it was like, I looked at her and I'm like, my God, is this everything? Like, you know, like when you're a kid and you're like, I want a blonde-haired girl. I always wanted a Southern girl with black hair, long black hair, who was, you know, just secure and very confident and could hang with the boys and didn't take crud from anybody. And I meet her. You know, like I'm thinking in 2 weeks from now I'm going home and I'm going to finish what I started, and then I meet her, right? And that's, you know, I started talking to her, and it was really cool. And then we were trying to get to our cabins, and I couldn't find my cabin, she couldn't find hers, and we kept passing each other in the hallways, and I thought, okay, that's really weird. And then later that evening for dinner, you know, it's just like I said, one thing just kept happening after another, and I wasn't oblivious to it, but because I wasn't religious at the time, I didn't have the relationship with God that I do now. It was like I kept trying to ignore it, like, no, this can't be good, this can't be for me, this can't be for me, right? Because you don't feel deserving, right? Which is a very common trait of a lot of military personnel when they get out and they've got PTS and some other issues. And so, you know, we were laughing at each other like we can't find our cabins. Ended up, our cabins weren't far from each other. And then that night at dinner, the very first night you're on the cruise and you go out, it's not you don't sit with your group. It's random seating, right? Okay. And it was the day after my birthday, and so it was February 5th. And I'm on there. This cruise, everything was included except for alcohol, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm at a table, and it's weird because I remember sitting at the table and there were like 5 other couples, right? It was just me. F got seated all the way across the other dining hall, right? And I'm sitting there at the table, and they end up sitting her right next to me. I mean, how incredible. Right, like what are the odds of that happening? And I'm trying to like ignore her, like I'm trying to talk to the other couples because I'm thinking, this is the last place I need to, you know what I mean? Like, and so I find that 2 of the couples are from my hometown in Missouri, and one of the guys I went to high school with. No way. Yeah, I didn't know him, but we went to high school together, and I was like, what are the odds of all that? So then one guy, they were going around the table talking about why they're on the cruise and what they're going to do on their time on the cruise and stuff like that. It was just because there was like these little papers you had to. It was like a game. Okay. And I said, well, it's my birthday, and so I hear that, I say that, and they're all like, oh, happy birthday. And this girl next to me, who I'm trying to ignore, right? She's like, she hits me. She goes, you didn't tell me it was your birthday. And it's like, well, I didn't. You know, I really didn't want it to be known. And she's like, no, I was laughing. She goes, oh, waiter, I need a beer right here. And I was like, I've never had a woman order me a drink. So the waiter comes over and he's like, oh, sir, well, what do you have? And I told her, I said, I can't afford a beer. And she's like, no, this is on me. And I said, well, listen, I'll pay you back later. And I'm thinking, how am I got 17 cents in my bank account. I can't even afford to send her a letter. Right. So she and I start hanging out, and making a longer story short, I spent that entire 2-week cruise with her. Fantastic. Yeah, and when I fell in love with her, man, and all of a sudden, towards the end of that cruise, it was probably the first person I had met in my life that I had that kind of connection with. Like, and it dawned on me that whether I believed in God or not, that conversation he and I had and the round not going off, and then the next morning getting on that boat and meeting her, there was something about all of that. Like I can look back now and go, yeah, he was like, yeah, you're not checking out, dude. I got plans for you. You just need to, I've learned since then, sometimes he's got to take everything away from you just to get you to listen, if you're a knucklehead. right? Like I was. And so, and then from that point, it was definitely a big change in my life. Yeah.
I mean, that's an incredible. If you went to Hollywood and say, "Hey, I have this idea for a movie," they would say, "Oh, that's too
It's crazy.
cliche. There's no way that would happen."
It's hard to. It's still hard for me to fathom it because my wife is the first person that, and I didn't know it then, but as she and I started to date and have a relationship, the hard part was all these walls that I had built up. Some of it was from my childhood. Just like I said, it wasn't a great childhood, and I don't really get into that. But my experience in the military and then afterwards, which were pretty bad, my walls were so tall and so thick that I wouldn't let anybody in. So like I was constantly like going up, going down, going up, going down, going up, going down in the relationship, and it was hard. It was really hard on her.
Sure.
But I think she came into my life, and it was hard. It was hard for me because the more I saw how I would make the relationship difficult for her, the more it tore at me. And what I found out is that those walls were starting, like she was chipping away, unbeknownst to her, chipping away slowly at those. And every time those walls start getting chipped, those things, you have to deal with that stuff that comes down. And I had no tools to deal with that at that time in my life. And so then what you try to do is you try to bury it, right? Like you try to suppress it because you've got this wonderful gift that's come into your life, and that's probably the only time that's going to happen. And then everything that led up to that and the change, right? Because I definitely didn't want to, I was never going to marry again, never have kids again, not even a thought. And but after I met her, everything just started changing. But it was a really hard process. I think for her, there's a lot that the spouse and the family have to deal with, and it finally got to a point where I realized that I was the problem, right? And it's like being an alcoholic, right? Like for the first step, I guess, is admitting it. I'm not a big drinker, but
right.
Is in that relationship, I started to realize that it's not her, it's actually me. And if I want to keep this and not screw it up, make it bad, I'm going to have to get some help. And that was another pivotal turning point, because there was no way on this earth I was giving her up.
Sure.
Yeah, no way. And she's a fighter, man. She'll tell you, I don't know if I could, she's got this southern charm, brother, that's like, this is one of the things I love about her so much, is she can tell you to go F yourself. And in the nicest, most polite way. And you'll kind of go, you know what? Yeah, I will go F myself.
Yeah, I deserve that.
Yeah, I will. Thanks.
Right,
yeah, I love you. And it was those kinds of long talks together, and her just never giving up, always supporting me, that really made me start to just, on my own, realize, man, things aren't right, And then as time went by, the more those walls came down, I wasn't processing or dealing with the challenges. And that's when, in around 2016, the bottom fell out again. It was, at that point we were married and we had our first kid, and which was awesome, because I remember, like, when we were talking about marriage, she had asked me, as long as you're open to having kids. You didn't say you have to, because she had seen the stuff I'd been through with my ex-wife, because my ex came back trying to get stuff years and years later, and really, I was really run through the ringer like a lot of dads are, and so she was really quite well aware of how that impacted me. And I remember when the changes started happening, and it was, in a way, it was a good way, because I was having to start to deal with things that I had to just suppress, push. You don't talk about it. The problem, I think, for most people is that when you push that stuff down, you can only do it for so long.
Right.
And I think that's one of the causes to the high suicide rate, right? Is you push it and push it and push it. But I started to realize that there's no more room. There's nothing. There's nowhere
The
else to
septic
put.
tank only holds so much shit,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And then you got to find a release for it.
Yeah.
So is this when you kind of started realizing, like, okay, I probably have
Something.
PTSD, or is that kind of when that finally
Yeah.
started, that thought process?
Yeah, and I think that there were a couple incidences that happened. I was still having a lot of problems with my back. My hearing was getting worse, and it definitely impacts the whole family unit, right? Like, I'd never thought of a family as a unit. Like, it's weird because you can think of a military team as a unit, but you don't think, it's weird how we don't bring those concepts into our personal lives all the time. But there was a point where, when I was coming home from work at that time in my life, before I'd get home, my now oldest daughter would hide. Because I was so consumed with anger and depression and everything that comes with not dealing with all that type of trauma. And what's weird is, like, because you grow up in that kind of situation and you experience that, for you that's normal. You don't see it. Like, you can't see. You're not on the outside looking in. You think that that's normal. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, they're like, okay, where are you at? Where's your stress level, right? Like, the average person, when you get to 6, your body's reacting, you're sweating, and I'm living at 40, right? This is the way that
Sure.
I'm living at 40 thinking this is normal, and if I'm not at 40, I gotta get to 40 to feel comfortable.
Right, you were basically redlining every day.
Every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And everything's about life or death, And then what I started to find out was, I'll never forget the day I came home and I used to sit in the car in the garage before I'd go inside because I'm trying to but I walked in and I asked Gina, I was like, where's our daughter, Katie? And she said, well, she just gets so upset when you come home. She's upstairs. And I found that my daughter would sense when I would get into the neighborhood. Like, she could pick up that vibe. And she would just hide. And I had to talk with her one night, and I was like, what is it that's upsetting you? Because I was in a good mood. At least I thought I was in a good mood. And what I found out was my stress and all that stuff that I'm not dealing with, as much as I think everything's fine, it's radiating so much that she picks it up when I pulled into the neighborhood, and she would go upstairs and hide in her bedroom. And it's not like I was being mean to her or anything.
No, but she could just sense it.
Oh, she said the minute you walked in the house, her and my wife said, you'd walk in the house from the garage and the whole atmosphere in the house would change. Like, you don't want to be here. And that was like stabbing. I'm right back to where I was. I've ruined everything, And it just sent me, yeah, I know, baby. I know. So she picks up on
she's sensing that.
Yeah. It was a stab in the heart, man. It was like you're ruining your kids and your wife. That's okay. I'm okay.
And as a dad and as a husband,
everything's
that's
going
the
wrong
last
again.
thing.
Yeah.
We're programmed to fix things and do this and do that, and then to finally come to the realization that, holy shit, I'm bringing in the house this tension and these feelings without even realizing it.
Yeah.
And so it's got to be, like you said, a stab in the heart, a kick in the face, however you want to say it. That when that realization hits you, like, damn.
Yeah. It's like taking me back, 10 years, right back to where I was, and I'm thinking, I did exactly what I promised I wouldn't do, and I have no idea why I'm doing it. And so what she's doing is she's like alerting, right? So she's letting me know, okay, hey, there's a change to our baseline. Let's kind of calm down a little bit. So
incredible.
Yeah, and so to answer your question, what, like, when did I know things were going bad? That was the point. And I talked to Gina, about it, and I went and I took myself to the VA and I said, this is what's going on, and I feel like the bottom's dropping out again, and my medications had come kind of way down. I was only I think about 6 or 7 medications at that time, mostly for pain management. And I talked to them about it, and at that time, I think people were really starting to kind of understand a little bit more about PTSD. I still wasn't a believer in it. Like, I was just like, it's kind of crap.
You're soft if you have
Yeah.
Yep.
And unfortunately, and I think it's changing, but at that time, our fellow brothers and sisters in arms were our worst enemies, because they're not going to admit that you have it, because if you do, then they have to admit they have it.
Right.
And if they do, then they can lose their job, right? So no one wants to admit it, and you can't talk to them about it because they don't. It just adds to their issue. You can't. It's just a vicious circle at that time. I think it's a lot better now. But I went to the VA. I took these self-eval tests. I guess that you go in and you fill out this. They ask you a bunch of questions. It's like 300 questions, and you answer all these questions. And then I got a phone call later that night saying, hey, we'd like to speak with you. Can you come into the VA? So I went into the VA and I met with a counselor, and they have you take this other test, and it's only 100 questions. And I scored I think it's you gain 1 to 100 points on this questionnaire, and I scored 99, all bad.
See, but that's not good on this
test.
It's
it's not a good scenario, and they're like, we want to, we've got a program coming up, and it deals with anger management and PTSD, and we think that we'd like to get you into this cohort. And I was at that time, I'm anything to save. I know, baby, I know. She doesn't like it when I talk about it, but we're just talking, boo. And so I went to the cohort. It was a real eye-opener. I learned so much about PTSD that I had, one, it was so obvious after I learned what the side effects and stuff are and the common behaviors. I was jaw-dropping, right? And I think every guy in there were 15 of us in that class. Same story, almost identical backgrounds, same problems. We're almost all at the same point. Second marriage, things are starting to fall apart, and none of us have a clue as to why, And I found it really helpful. It was just identifying what was going on was really helpful, and then trying to get a game plan of how to address it. And I'll be honest, it's still, it's a work in progress. Probably will be my whole life.
Sure.
But the more counseling I got, the more they started to feel like my walls, were so big and so thick that they were like, we're going to have to do something different with you. Because it wasn't just the military. Some of it was my childhood, I think, and you don't know that until you're older and you get into counseling or something like that. And I had no idea. Never would have guessed. I thought everybody where I grew up had that kind of childhood, So they said, there's a program out there, and the VA we're experimenting with service dogs, and they definitely can help you with your hearing situation. Because at that time I didn't have hearing aids, and it was really bad because it affected my job, it affected me at work, it can get you killed, right?
Sure.
If you don't hear sirens and you're going through an
right.
intersection, which is what happened to my daughter and I. I almost got crushed by 5 fire trucks. I didn't hear them, and I went through the intersection, or was going through the intersection, and if my daughter hadn't screamed, I wouldn't have stopped. We'd have been crushed. But as I was going through that, they said, we recommend a service dog for you, and here's a couple different places you can reach out to, do some research of your own, and tell us what you think. I had never grown up with dogs. I never, I didn't really associate them as a kid. So I had no idea, what do you even do with a dog, right? And
so that was your first introduction into, this is something that's out there.
Yeah, and it was still pretty new, right? As far as I knew, I knew, typically when you think of a service dog at that time, I think it was like if you're blind or completely deaf, right?
Sure.
And you can use a service dog. That was my first thought. But so they gave me some information about this organization called Paws for Vets, and it's the number 4, not the number spelled out, because there's another organization, and I'm not sure if they're still around. They spell it out, and they're not legit. So the Paws for Vets is a subgroup of Paws for people. Chef. Hey, I'm okay. So this is one of the great things, right? With her, like when she senses something off the baseline, right? They alert. They want to get your attention, and so what they do is they're like, hey, focus on me.
So they're trying to get you distracted in a sense.
Yeah, and they retrain you. They help you retrain your brain so that because our self-thought, our self-talk is what I think it's called. It can be really negative, right? Like when you got PTS or just trauma or something like that, and you start running scenarios that aren't real or replaying scenarios. And what this cognitive therapy process that they do is they interrupt that behavior. And so over time, every time they pick up on them. The longer they're with you, the more they get to know when you're like that, whether it's through smell or behavior or tone or all of it. They pick up on it, and then they interrupt that behavior. So over time, that behavior diminishes or goes away altogether.
Sure.
You're not coming up here.
Okay. Well, listen, I appreciate you sharing that background information.
Yeah.
We'll definitely get into the next step for you, which is going through the service dog transition and how that went for you. But seriously, thanks for sharing that. I know that's some painful memories.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that you've made it through, and I look forward to hearing more about you and Chevrolet and your journey.
Oh, it's our pleasure, man. I think anything we can do to share, let people know that it's not, it's not impossible, and you work against the odds, or if the odds are against you, it's not over. I think there's a lot of really good support out there, especially in our community here. It's just pouring out. You just got to find it.
Sure.
So I can't thank you enough, brother.
Of course,
for the
man.
time.
Thank you guys for checking us out here. Stay tuned. We're going to do another video where we get more into Mike's experience and how he was able to come in contact with Chevrolet and that process. So stay tuned, and I hope this was helpful for you and beneficial to you guys. Thanks for stopping by. Incredible, dude. Seriously, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Man, to think that you were there and
yeah. I still have that bullet. Gina won't let me throw it away.
I saw, and that's Hollywood, but have you ever seen the movie Man on Fire?
Yeah, the teacher where he's. Is
that
the one?
No, Denzel.
Oh no.
Where he's like some sort of. Do you want to take her out for a break?
Yeah, I'll take her out in a minute.
Let's go do that now.
If that's cool with you.
Yeah, of course.
That way I can just change the atmosphere a little bit.
Let me just.
I don't want to be so negative.